if pro athletes need a team to keep them at high performance for sport, what do we have as the general population that's going to keep us at high performance for life? And then the second thought was, okay, if the structure that you see in the professional sporting space is required for these guys to perform at a high level, what hope do we have as the general population if we don't have a team that's helping us do what we want to do on a daily basis?
Welcome to Be Well. Today I'm joined by Dr. Greene, co-founder and medical doctor of Monarch Athletic Club, a next generation gym that actually merges preventive medicine, performance training, recovery, and nutrition under one roof. Ryan will share a lot more about what Monarch does later. And you're redefining how we think actually about proactive health by creating a fully integrated physician-led environment designed to optimize both health span and performance. Ryan, it's you're not just a physician, you're also an entrepreneur, you're an investor. It's great having you with us today on this Sunday. And yeah, it would be lovely if you could share a couple of words about you personally before we start talking more about what you guys do at Monarch. The stage is yours, and feel free to share a couple of words.
Thanks for having me. And first of all, it's amazing, to think that this movement, how global it is, and kind of the what we're seeing from people and the feedback we get from around the world, in the sense that people are hearing about what we're doing, but they're also experiencing this, whatever you want to call it, longevity, health span, health is wealth, that whole thing. It's extremely exciting. So for me personally, growing up, all I ever really wanted to do was to help people. And I didn't quite understand what that meant until I got into the medical space, med school, residency and whatnot. And I think what I believed and what I refined in terms of what my purpose was is, I believe being a human being is an incredible experience. I think there's a lot of cool things that we get to do, which is why we were, sent here. I don't believe it was to take. I think ultimately, if everyone's giving and everyone's trying to help other people, then we're also receiving that assistance from others. And for me specifically, that just meant, helping people stay healthy, because when you're healthy, you get to live the life that you want to live, meaning you get to do whatever you want to do whenever you want to do it. And I think that's one of the things, unfortunately, at least in this country, I see it and I hear it all the time, which is you hit your 40s, your 50s, your 60s, and all of a sudden the list of things that you used to enjoy doing gets shorter and shorter and shorter. And I think that's a travesty. I hear on almost a daily basis people say, I used to be able to run, but I can't run anymore. I'm like, okay, well, that's like, why can't you run anymore? It's, I've got arthritis or whatever it is. Or I used to like to do X, Y, or Z, but I have this injury and I have, all these other limiting considerations that I have to take into account. And I think for me, the human body is capable of incredible amounts of healing, right? Like the brain can consistently regenerate almost ad infinitum, like it can go forever. The body, as long as we keep the conditions in which we are exposing ourselves, the best we can possibly make them, the human body has an incredible level of resilience. And I think that's one of the biggest realizations that I've come to as of late is I am not healing you. If you came to see me, I have no power over what happens in your body. What I can do is help create an environment that allows your body to thrive. Just like a trainer isn't actually making you stronger, they're just setting up the conditions and hopefully giving you a roadmap that allows your muscles to grow and strength to grow, things like that. And so what I hoped to create with this Monarch system was essentially a place that people felt comfortable and enjoyed going on a regular basis that would allow them to achieve the best possible quality of life throughout their entire lifespan. And that's the other part that I think has been, I would say, kind of corrupted in the health and wellness space, where healthy equals a certain aesthetic, right? You look a certain way, you have abs, you're not overweight. And I think for me, health is partially about how your body looks and how you treat yourself, but it's also how does it make you feel when you're healthy? Because then you can do the things that you enjoy. And that could be anything from playing with your grandkids to, being able to do marathons until you're 100, whatever that looks like. So, when I talk to people in forums such as this, as well as our members, one of the things that I say on a regular basis is I can guarantee 100% of humanity basically needs five things. You need to sleep well, you need to eat well, you need to hydrate, you need to move your body consistently, and you need to connect with other human beings. Like those are the five main things. And that has nothing, like you don't need a medical degree to figure that one out. Like that's pretty consistent. Beyond that, we have technologies now that can help us understand things a little bit deeper, like heart disease risk, diabetes risk, hormones, which I think are incredibly important that we haven't paid attention to. And so like we can use technology because we are a medical entity and we have the ability as well as the privilege to bring those things into our environment. But those are more just kind of like fact finding and almost like, like guardrails to be like, hey, we're kind of drifting off the main path. But at the end of the day, if you can do those five things well every single day, you will probably live a very long and healthy life. And at least in the United States, and it's starting to seep into other cultures, sleep is only starting to be re-recognized as important. That's Whoop, that's Aura, that's all these wearables, 8 Sleep, all these, devices now that are helping to optimize sleep. Food, terrible. Like you're starting to, where you guys are, Western culture seeping in. I remember last time I was in Stockholm, I went into like the old town and there was like a TGI Fridays and people were like, oh my God, like it was packed. I was like, this is terrible. We need to get this out of here. Like we need to get this Western food out of here. Movement, I was just in France and, people were talking about gyms that are starting to pop up and how people really want to go and lift weights and strength train. So like, even those simple things, we are still not experts nor fully integrating those basic foundations. So I think when we created Monarch, one of the things that I really wanted to emphasize was like, yeah, there's a lot of cool anti-aging and longevity technology that we can integrate, but ultimately it is zero value unless you have those foundations established. And so we will continue to emphasize those components every single day, which is movement, food, sleep, connection with other people. And then, we'll add in some of those components that are more technologically advanced. One, as they're available, and also as we feel like they can enhance everything else that we're doing.
Amazing. Thank you very much for sharing that. And I think I could resonate with a lot of things that you were just saying. Absolutely. And what I find quite fascinating, the reason why I'm doing the podcast, mostly I'm interested how can actually people who build businesses contribute to that, right? Or building ventures that actually address these topics. So I think you are right there. Maybe before introducing us more into the core offering of Monarch, I'd be very curious to learn more what you guys do exactly, maybe also how the user experience looks like. But could you also introduce us quickly into your personal background? I know you're a physician, and also how the idea came up to actually build Monarch. Which gap did you identify early on in the market, or not only gap, but what triggered you to build Monarch ultimately?
Yeah. So I grew up in the Midwest of the United States, which is, very traditional in terms of people just kind of grow up. And there's a stat that I read that 75 to 80% of the people that grow up in the middle of the United States never move more than 50 miles radius away. Like people just stay there, family, whatever it is. So it's pretty traditional, and it kind of takes a long time for new things to get through there. I never felt like that was in alignment with who I was. I always wanted to be doing something on the leading edge. So when I went to medical school, I moved out of the Midwest, lived in Denver, and that was kind of my expansion into, oh my gosh, there's a life outside of what I see in this Midwest. Like people are active, they're eating differently, they're plant-based, they're focusing on supplementation and all this other stuff. And I had really great mentors when I went to med school, which I'm fortunate that pushed me to think differently and to challenge the traditional beliefs. I did a surgical residency because I was like, hey, I really want to do something that's not in medicine. Just you come in and you have high blood pressure, then I give you a pill. Like that didn't really feel like medicine. For me, I wanted to fix things with my hands. So surgery made the most sense. But once I actually got into the hospital system, what I realized was medicine isn't really a practice. It's kind of dictated by, in our country, what insurance tells you you can or can't do, right? Like if I wanted to do a whole set of unique labs for you, right now, insurance says this is what's covered, this is what's not. And it always was like, well, why do you get to tell me what, you need from the patient standpoint. Like, I'm the one that's the medical practitioner. So I kind of started to figure out that, like, if I wanted to do something that actually helped people, I was going to have to step out of this paradigm. But no one had done what we've done. So it was kind of a scary consideration, like not following the traditional path. And then when I was in fellowship at Mayo Clinic, I was reading articles about LeBron James and all these athletes who are spending millions of dollars a year on recovery, right? Cold, sauna, Therabody, leg compression boots. And I was like, okay, if pro athletes need a team to keep them at high performance for sport, what do we have as the general population that's going to keep us at high performance for life? And then the second thought was, okay, if the structure that you see in the professional sporting space is required for these guys to perform at a high level, what hope do we have as the general population if we don't have a team that's helping us do what we want to do on a daily basis, if that makes sense? Because when you think about you, me, and everyone else, you have to have the motivation to go to a gym. And then next step is you have to figure out what kind of training program are you going to follow. So do you sign up for an app? Nowadays you can use ChatGPT. Let alone, are you getting your blood work done, which 3 years ago, like just getting, a longevity focused lab work didn't really exist. But now you have Function, you've got Life Force, you've got a couple other businesses in the space that are democratizing access to this kind of blood work. But that didn't exist, 12 years ago when I was thinking about this. So I was just really motivated personally to create something that said, I would like to give everyone the same access that a professional athlete has, except your playing field is not a sporting pitch. It's actually a boardroom or being a parent at home or whatever that looks like. But you still need to, function well if you want to really enjoy life to the fullest. So that was kind of my motivation to create the system. No one had done anything like what we were doing. So it took me a while to find people that believed in what we were doing. I pitched this idea to Mayo Clinic because they had kind of like a Y Combinator healthcare startup section, and they enjoyed it, but they just said, hey, we don't really see money in the preventative health space, which at the time was not unreasonable. Nowadays, we're recognizing how much money is spent and should be spent on health and wellness. So, it's a $1 trillion space. And I eventually found my now business partners who have, basically supported and provided the initial startup capital to get our first club open, which ended up opening in January of 2020. And that was the beginning of everything. I didn't recognize, obviously, that a global pandemic would impact all of us 2 months later. But in the design of the club, I wanted to be a medical facility with other amenities kind of falling under that umbrella. And the reason I wanted that is because I believed at some point, at least in the United States, our insurance structure would eventually start to cover preventative health because the costs to keep people covered is just simply too high. The numbers are astronomical, at least in the United States. And so I believed if we were a medical concept, we could essentially use the system to our benefit, which is we can prescribe anything, we can, make, whatever recommendations we need, and eventually insurance would cover that. And that's starting to become a possibility. We opened January of 2020. We opened our second club in April of 2023, and we just opened our third club last week, actually. So, we have 3 clubs now in the Los Angeles area, and we're about to open 5 more over the next 2 to 3 years. So we're moving at a good clip, and it's partially because people are responding very well to what we're doing, and we've definitely discovered that there is a need for this kind of one-stop shop kind of mentality. To your other question, which is like, what is the member experience? We have a membership model. It's a flat fee. If you look at the numbers, we charge around $1,500 per month, but it's for all services included. You could use a trainer every day. You could see a physical therapist or physio every day. You can meet with the medical team whenever you want. You can meet with the nutritionist every day. You can use the facilities that include a hot element, a cold element, and most clubs have a hyperbaric element as well. So we kind of took what most people were spending money on in multiple parts, their gym, their recovery, concierge medicine, which is becoming much more popular in the United States. And we put that all together in one spot and said, hey, we're going to coordinate your healthcare program for you. All you have to do is show up. So, in total, what we've offered is actually a extremely high value because most people are spending that money. It's just in multiple different places. There's no coordination, which makes things difficult. And also, at least in the US, everyone's so busy. We tend to overfill our plates. So being able to drive to multiple places every day to have your program executed, yeah, crazy. Like it's crazy. 5 miles or 10 to 12 kilometers could take you 60 minutes to get. It's just like, it's insane. So from a member standpoint, every member has a full evaluation when they join, which is medical, movement, physio, nutrition. And we essentially build a plan based on what you're capable of, what you want to achieve, and how do we think we can get you there in a reasonable amount of time. But also remembering that like health and your healthcare journey really has no end, meaning like whether you're 30 or you're 60, most people are going to be living until their 80s, 90s, or 100s. So like, how can we get people to live, well for decades? And it's going to take consistent inputs over long periods of time, which means like, this isn't a 90-day program. This isn't a 30-day challenge. Like we're trying to get people to change behaviors for a long period of time. So, we check in quarterly from a medical standpoint, blood work, body composition. From a strength and a movement standpoint, we're reassessing people, grip strength, push-ups, pull-ups, VO2, because we also want people to understand like their results are not just aesthetic and physical. Like there are other things that matter in terms of health, wellness, and longevity. For instance, grip strength is probably the easiest and most accurate metric to understand, morbidity and mortality risk, because like, if your grip strength starts to decline, like we're clearly not doing something correct to help you maintain strength and muscle mass. If your body composition, if you're losing overall lean mass, you're not getting enough protein, you're probably not training. Like those are all the things that we want to help people appreciate are part of their healthcare journey beyond just how you look. Like aesthetics are great, but that's not the end all be all. So those things we do on a quarterly basis. But then the day to day is just, members have the opportunity to use all of our services as often as they want. And, hopefully they continue to make progress towards whatever goals they have, on a quarterly basis. And we also acknowledge like, how you're probably in your late 20s, early 30s. Like your goals today are going to be different than your goals 10 years from now. And that's totally fine. We feel confident that we have a team and a program that can adapt as your goals adapt, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I really enjoyed also about your answer, sort of the analogy with athletes. That was particularly for me, I think, the trigger point to get more into this space. There's a lot of founders I talk to, they oftentimes have maybe a health incident that triggers them to build in the health and wellness space. But maybe when you're younger, chances are you have maybe a different motivator. And that was exactly the point. I was actually interested in entrepreneurs overall, and also athletes and how they approach their careers, very intentional. And I always like to bring up, I'm here in Switzerland, Germany, and for instance, you have Bayern Munich, right? The soccer club here. And if you look how the setup was maybe 30 years ago, they were like amateurs, right? They just went on the field, played a little bit, but nowadays they have an entire support system around them, right? Be it mental coaches, nutritionists, athletic coaches, everything. And they can only laser focus on what's important. That's performing and feeling good, maybe for more usual people. And I feel like, this trend could lap over, more to all of us, right? And become a lot more accessible. So it's very, very interesting what you're working on, in that
Thank
sense.
you. Yeah. Over the pandemic, I think one of the things that I heard a lot was, people watched the Chicago Bulls documentary, which was called The Last Dance, which was all about like Michael Jordan and their 6 championships. And it's funny because like, one, we didn't have social media back then. And if we did, the thought that Michael Jordan would go play 18 holes of golf and drink and smoke cigars, and then he would play in a playoff basketball game later that night is like insane, especially, today. And now you hear about in sport, load management, and people are wearing the catapult devices. So, for instance, a soccer athlete, they know how many meters they've run, how much exertion in every game. And then they're shifting their training volume the following week based on output. Like that didn't exist 20 years ago. So, obviously integrating those pieces of technology is reasonable, not only for pro athletes, but like, why not for the general population? Like, we should be looking at how much you've been lifting and then changing your program accordingly. Or if you have international travel for work, like adjusting your program based on nervous system stress and sleep and things like that. So yeah, I mean, I came from a place where I was working with patients who clearly had numerous things that were contributing to their ailments that were simply, in my opinion, fixable, but we just didn't have the infrastructure to address that. And so hopefully, as we continue to grow and expand this Monarch concept, we will continue to plant locations all around the US and beyond so that you may be a member at Monarch Zurich. And then when you're in the US for business, you could drop into Monarch Manhattan, Monarch West Hollywood, whatever that is. Like, the things that we're doing are global. They're not constrained by geography. Like, I guarantee when you work out, you're probably doing squats and lunges and deadlifts. Like, so am I. Your testosterone metrics are being evaluated the same that we're evaluating them. Like, there should be communication, and it shouldn't matter what country you're in, because ultimately we all have very similar parts.
Amazing. Ryan, I mean, you've been in the space now for a while. One thing I observed talking to founders in that space is, I mean, oftentimes you have tons of definitions flying around, right? You have health, wellness, longevity, performance,
Yeah.
whatever you want to call it, preventative health. How would you define, or what word do you like to use to best convey to clients, partners, the ecosystem, what you actually do, and what are your thoughts about this fragmentation, let's say, of the preventative health space?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're still trying to figure out, like, how do you define this category? The example that I utilize, and I don't know if, to be honest, you'll be familiar with it, but like the term med spa in the US is essentially IVs, Botox, fillers, skin treatments, things like that. I learned that word was made up. Like, someone just created this category that was like a medical spa, and not everyone, at least in the US, knows what a med spa is. I don't know if we have a word or a category that defines what we're doing quite yet, because I think longevity is starting to take on this connotation, which is like, how do you maximize lifespan? Meaning live to 120, live to 150. I think quality of life is extremely important. And so I think from our standpoint, like, is it wellness? Sure. Is it preventative? Sure. Is it longevity? Yeah, if that means you're trying to maximize, quality of life, meaning years without disease. Some people call that health span, like some people call it longevity. So, I think for us, what we really wanted to create was a multidisciplinary space that allow people to do what they want to do for as long as they want to do it, whatever that is. Like, really just keeping your physical form in a condition where you never have to say no. Doesn't mean you're going to perform the same when you're 80 as you did when you're 18, but I just never want to see someone not be able to participate and enjoy life because of some sort of physical or medical ailment, if that makes sense. So I think for us, we're kind of bridging health, longevity, wellness, prevention, fitness, and we're putting it all in one space. But I don't know if we have a word for that quite yet. So we call our spaces athletic clubs, because if someone was to describe you and they said, yeah, Toby's athletic, I don't think anyone gets offended by that. And I think what people realize is, like, that means you've taken care of yourself and you're active and your things and all that. So yeah, I believe having the ability to integrate new technology as it becomes available is helpful, and having a medically directed concept is helpful there, because we have the rights and the privilege to do that. But at the end of the day, like, human optimization, I think is an interesting word for it, which is just like, how do you keep this machine working at the highest level? And I think it's no different than, keeping a car functioning for a long period of time. You have classic cars and you're like, how do you keep your 1960 Porsche running well? Well, you got to take care of it. You got to tend to it. You got to change the oil. You got to make sure, all the parts are clean and in good working order. And you can't just like wait till they break down to do that. And so when you think about the human body, like, it is a machine. It's trillions of cells that technically are independent organisms that are all working together for, hopefully, a positive outcome. So how do you create an environment so that can happen? And we're giving it a shot with these one-stop shops.
Ryan, apart from Monarch, you're also an advisor and investor in other ventures. And I'll be wondering, I mean, also in the health and wellness space, what trends in the health and wellness space excite you most right now? Or maybe is there anything simultaneously that you feel like is maybe overhyped, misunderstood about the overall industry?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really excited about AI in the healthcare space, essentially from the sense that there's in the US, I think there's 600 or 700 wearables that currently exist. So like we have all this data. The question is like, how do you as the end user better understand and then apply all this information that you're working with? And I think that's where AI and tech is going to be interesting in terms of platforms that you can have on your phone or on your computer that can help guide you to participating in healthier behaviors every single day. I think the other area that, at least in the US, I'm excited about and we're working on is the incentive piece. Because what's interesting in health and wellness is high performers tend to have to spend a lot of money to achieve their outcomes. But that's a small percentage of the overall population. So how do we take this idea that we're creating and share it amongst a large number of people, regardless of socioeconomic status? And I think that's where, at least in the United States, the insurance piece is interesting, which is, okay, if you behave appropriately, which we can track, movement, sleep, body comp, blood work, is there a way that we can incentivize you financially to continue to participate in these behaviors? Because right now there's really not an incentive. Like you're either spending the money if you have it and hopefully making progress. But we see a lot of people who are like, my job changed or I had a kid or whatever, and now all of a sudden my economic outlook is a little bit different. Can I continue to afford to spend money on these things that are keeping me functioning at a high level? And a lot of people right now, like that's a decision they have to make. And typically that discretionary spend on themselves unfortunately becomes something that is eliminated from their budget. So I do believe there's an intersection between the data we're collecting, how we can digest it, how we can use artificial intelligence to continue to help support healthy behaviors, whether that's like, for instance, we're building an app right now that would allow you to optimize your schedule, meaning like, can it book your training session, your physio session, your medical session around your work and your meetings? And if things shift, they can then adjust your training program so that you don't have to like cancel a session and then you're too busy to rebook it. So now, you go a day or two and you lose momentum. Like that's an interesting piece. And then from the medical side too, a medical visit in the United States is like 7 minutes. It's hard to get a lot done in 7 minutes. But if I was able to look at some sort of platform where I can see your sleep, your blood glucose, your activity levels, all these things. And then when you come in, I have an understanding of like, okay, why do we think things are working well or not working well? And how can we improve that? And we don't have to go through, subjective response, which, you may or may not be telling the truth. I may or may not be getting the whole picture. All the data is there and we can just sit down and be like, this is what's working. This is what's not. These are the things we need to change. And then we can just make progress. Like those are interesting things from the technologic standpoint. I think peptides are super interesting just because they're naturally occurring compounds that we're learning more about what they are and what they can do. And, we can optimize recovery capacity, specifically growth hormone. I think growth hormone's been ignored for too long. And, it's one of the only hormones that has a receptor on every single cell in the human body. So clearly it's important, but we're seeing levels decline faster than normal throughout our lifespan because we're not sleeping well, we're not exercising regularly, all those lifestyle things are not happening. Testosterone, at least in the United States, has become a hot topic as of late because of its importance, not only for muscle building, but mood and mental state, libido, things like that. So, being able to gather that information and then integrate that into, a daily program, whether that's leveraged with AI or not, I think is super interesting. There's a lot of talk about, like gene therapies and NAD and stuff like that. Super interesting, but the price point is still pretty significant. And I think it's going to be extremely expensive for a while. So it doesn't really apply to the general population, which is where I always come back to like, what is the simplest and most effective thing that we can do that's going to yield the greatest results for the most people? And there's a quote that I heard in the Founders podcast, which is an amazing podcast, by the way. David
Love
Senra is
it.
awesome. where they said you can spot a novice in any field because they're trying to do too many things, too many movements, too many supplements, too many things. A master at anything has figured out that, the way to true mastery is the most efficient, fewest steps, least complicated that you can possibly do. And I think right now, especially in health and wellness, there's just 1,000 different things that are being dumped on people, whether it's from podcasts or Instagram or whatever. And people are now trying to just do as many things as they possibly can, assuming that the more that I do, the better I'll be. When in actuality, it's going to be a refinement of like, okay, these are the critical things that I have to do regularly. How do I get, a level of mastery there? And then I can sprinkle in other technologies when they're needed for a certain period of time. And, again, having guidance around that from, professionals in the space, whether that's in a Monarch Club or, accessed on a larger scale in some way, shape, or form, I think is super interesting. But, I continue to come back to the fact that we have 500 something members between our two clubs, and that number is going to grow considerably now that we have a third. And I can tell you unequivocally, like, this population, which is considered high achievers for the most part, because they're early adopters, are terrible at the basics, like terrible. But because the human body is resilient, like it doesn't look like they're diseased or they're, crippled or anything like that. But at a certain point, things are going to start to fall apart. So how do we get them to recognize that, like, if you want to avoid that rapid decline, you have to be excellent at the basics? And how are you going to continue to strengthen that foundation? And we believe that's going to be by participating in what we've created.
Amazing. Ryan, let's talk quickly also about growth and scaling for you guys. I mean, you've just mentioned how many clubs you've launched since the start or since the founding moment. And
Yep.
now you've also expanded to Miami, or
Yep.
you are expanding to Miami.
Correct.
What's been your go-to-market so far, and what are the milestones maybe in the coming months in terms of go-to-market for you guys? Anything you could share?
Yeah. I mean, so LA was a great place to prove concept because it's a very health-focused area. New York is obviously a big market, and, people assume if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere, which is not untrue. But from a health and wellness standpoint, LA probably is one of the leading markets in terms of that sector. So, we wanted to establish ourselves, build a reputation, and prove ourselves in this market, which I believe, we have done and are continuing to do. At the end of the day, we are a four-wall concept, right? Like, you need spaces, you need people paying memberships. What we've done is we've made sure that the deals that we're doing from a brick and mortar standpoint are allowing us to continue to grow and scale without significant capital cost, because we've essentially bootstrapped this thus far. We're in conversations to, start taking on more investment that would allow us to grow and scale at a rapid rate, because we do believe that we are the leaders in the field. And in order to continue to establish that momentum, we need to open up more clubs. Miami is basically Los Angeles, but just hotter and more humid. So, we've seen a lot of people throughout the pandemic and over the last few years relocating from LA to Miami. So we had an opportunity in that market that was basically zero cost to us. It was a management deal structure with a developer who's building a very nice commercial real estate concept. And so we got to open a club there, which will open in the next, 9 months or so. That cost us $0. So like, that was our reason we chose Miami. Beyond that, we're kind of looking at markets that we recognize has, a high density of wealth, but they may not necessarily have the same exposure to leading edge health and wellness. So, South Florida is an interesting market. New York will always be, on the pipeline, and we'll get there eventually. But we're also looking at places like Scottsdale and Boston and Dallas and other areas where there's definitely people who can afford what we're doing. But, high-end health and wellness hasn't made its way there quite yet. So, we have those markets that we're looking at that would be considered like A+ in terms of the economic potential, but we're also recognizing that there's a lot of places with people who can afford what we're doing, but the world has kind of passed them by in terms of, establishing these valuable brands that we believe we are. In the brick and mortar space, you got to get your leases done, you got to get construction done. Those things take time. So we're starting to set up more deals so that, 27, 28 and beyond, instead of one or two clubs per year, which we could probably just do on our own with our own successes. But what does it look like to open 3 to 5 clubs per year, potentially supported with some growth capital from these institutional investors that recognize health is a very valuable concept and probably more valuable than we've ever really paid attention to.
What would you say is maybe a major misconception you oftentimes encounter when talking to members or potential investors about Monarch Athletic Club? Is there anything that people don't get at first sight?
Yeah, I think people look at the price point and assume that it's like the ultimate luxury that's only going to be affordable by the top 1%. And as I mentioned before, in LA, in New York, in Chicago, in Miami, and Equinox has 120 something locations. Lifetime Fitness, which is another well-established health and wellness concept, has 200 something locations, I believe. And most of those people are paying around $300 to $400 per month. But the misconception is, oh, if I pay $300 to $400 per month for a gym, I should be healthy. And the data shows unequivocally that's just simply not true, because movement alone is not going to solve these health problems. You need to pay attention to everything else that we've talked about: sleep, metabolic health, things like that. In 2020, I heard all the time, I can't believe I'm spending $1,500 US per month on my gym. And I'm like, well, you're not. You're spending this on a multidisciplinary health program that's going to keep you healthy and save you 5 to 6 times the amount of money down the road, but you have to invest early. You can't wait until things are broken. Otherwise, that cost is even more significant. It's exponentially higher to wait until things are broken for you to fix it. Psychologically, I think people are still like, wow, $1,500. Not a lot of people can afford that. And in the markets that we're going, we do believe, and we have seen that there are many people that can afford that and are willing to pay that amount of money. The other part that I try to remind people is, like, our price point today is predicated on what we have to pay for rent and cost of labor. That model is not the same in every US city. That model is not the same in London or Zurich or Dubai. The economics of the space are a little bit different potentially, which means that we can adjust our price point to make something a little bit more feasible for people. We're not just going to charge the same rate everywhere, because that doesn't necessarily make sense. We wouldn't have to. So yeah, I mean, I think that's the one thing. We're only 6 years in. We're only 6 years old. So, like, it feels like I've been doing this my entire life, but in actuality, it hasn't been that long. So I am hopeful that, as the years pass and the environment of the United States and other places start to recognize, like, your most important investment is going to be in yourself for 1,000 reasons. Like, all of a sudden, what we offer isn't considered a luxury, it's considered a necessity, because of all the ancillary benefits that also may not be appreciated immediately, but 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the road, you'll realize, holy cow, like, I avoided a lot of burden, whether that's emotional, social, mental, physical, or financial, because I did take time and I invested in myself.
Thank you very much. Maybe we're closely coming to an end, but one question that came up to my mind is, I saw that you also publish podcasts, or do you do podcasts yourself with members occasionally?
Yeah.
One thing I'll be wondering is, I assume you have also exposure to a lot of, entrepreneurs, artists, people who are hardworking, but still want to make sure that they're healthy at your club. And yeah, I'll be wondering, hey, is there any advice based on that experience also you would give to maybe younger people that want to perform in whatever field they want to perform at? Is there anything that you observed during that time among people who want to perform well, but also not sacrifice their health for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the reason why we started our podcast, is we recognized, like, we have a concentrated density of very unique people that have done really unique things. Like, we had a podcast with Chris Lake, who's a global renowned DJ, right? And I've gotten to know him over the last 3 to 4 years, like, not only as a patient, but also as a friend. And I was watching a documentary on Avicii on Netflix, and I was just like, man, I wonder, like, do these brilliant people that create brilliant things, whether that's music or businesses, like, do they have to be these comets that just burn really bright for a short period of time and then they destroy themselves, they explode? Like, does it have to be like that? Or, is there a world where we can get these people to recognize by taking care of themselves, by investing in themselves preventatively, we can extend the duration that they're able to do great work, which only benefits the rest of us because we keep these people around for a longer period of time. Like, I'm a huge fan of Steve Jobs. Like, if he wasn't so insane about like how he took care of himself and how hard he worked and whatever, like, would we have had Steve Jobs for an additional 20 or 30 years? And then who knows what kind of technologies that we would have created? Like, I don't know. I don't know. So I wanted to have those conversations. And so that's why we started the podcast. To answer your second question is like, I've learned that it doesn't really matter what you do, where you put your effort as a human being, like where your passion lies. I don't really care. I think everyone has a mission that they are meant to achieve while we are alive. And I am confident that if we do not take care of ourselves, it is difficult to then pour all of our focus, effort, and attention into what we are passionate about. Because if you don't feel well, you're not going to be the best at what you do on a daily basis, which means you are diminishing the gifts that you've been given that were meant to be shared with others. And I think that is one of the things that drives me is like, how can I create a movement that helps people just be the absolute best version of who they are? Because when that is established, everything else that you're passionate about and you want to do, you can do to the highest level. And like, we don't know the potential outcomes and positive effects that can have, but we know those ripples will continue to propagate as long as you are able to show up and do what you're meant to do. And if we don't allow people to get to that point, I just think it's a disservice to the rest of humanity, because then we can't get the best out of everyone. And unfortunately right now that happens more often than not. So yeah, like, it's a challenge every day. It's one of those things where Elon Musk says like being a startup founder or an entrepreneur is like staring into an abyss and eating glass at the same time, because like there's existential threats that seem to pop up every day where you're like, are we going to make it till tomorrow? So, the founder's journey is not for the faint of heart. It's definitely not easy, but I would tell anyone, and I do share this with our members and staff, is like, if you are passionate about something, I believe it is your duty to continue to pursue your passion to its fullest extent. And from my standpoint, if you're not healthy of body, mind, spirit, I don't think that's going to be possible. And ultimately, I think it's an unfortunate reality right now where we're not able to be the best version of ourselves as individuals as well as a collective, because we're just not taking care of this body that we've been given.
Great. Fine. Thank you very much. Really appreciate your time. It was a wonderful conversation. And
Yeah.
I noticed that you've been listening to the Founders podcast as well.
Every
Occasionally,
week.
when you have time.
Every week. It's my when I'm driving home, one of my favorite things to do is listen to David. And I'm fortunate that when he had his kind of like founders retreats, he's done two so far. Like, I made sure that I was able to attend, and just being in a room with people that are brilliant, doesn't matter if it's in your same field or not. Like, we're always learning from each other. And as he would say, like, the beautiful aspect of humanity is like, we write stuff down or we record things so that we can share this knowledge with other people. So if you're not reading and listening to the journey of other people, like, it's unfortunate, because like, we literally have the playbook through thousands of years of US history, human history. And, it's just one of those things that's unique to humans compared to any other animals. Like, we can share what we've learned, what works, what doesn't work, and the information's available for all of us. So yeah, there's probably only the Founders podcast, I think, is probably the most valuable resource that I've ever discovered, because David does an incredible job kind of distilling all the learnings from history's greatest founders and entrepreneurs. And I think it's incredibly valuable.
Great. Thank you very much, Ryan, and all the
Thank
best
you.
to you at Monarch. And
Yeah.
let's see, maybe there's going to be a Monarch Zurich one day.
Hey, I'm a huge fan of Switzerland, so I would love to get there.
Amazing. Bye.
Thank you.